Well?
Nothing.
He didn't say it?
No.
He didn't say what?
No.
He didn't say where?
No.
You gave him the work?
Yes.
And he didn't say it?
No.
He wept?
Yes.
Screamed?
Yes.
Begged for mercy?
Yes.
But didn't say it?
No.
Then why stop?
He passed out.
And you didn't revive him?
I tried.
Well?
I couldn't.
It's a lie. He said it to you. Confess he said it to you. You'll be given the works until you confess.
Of the original resistance group of 80, fewer than 20 survived the war. Although Beckett referred to his work as mere Boy Scout stuff, Charles de Gaulle presented him with the Croix de Guerre for his actions. Characteristically, Beckett never spoke of the war experience.
And he had this period of withdrawal from the world. And it was only after he came back to Paris after the war, when he had been hiding in the south of France, that the floodgates suddenly opened.
At the age of 40, Beckett had a breakthrough in his writing which he attributed to a particular event in his life. Shortly after the war, he paid a visit to his mother in Ireland. Out by the sea on Dunleary Pier, Beckett had an experience which he later confided to a friend was a revelation.
Great granite rocks, the foam flying up in the light of the lighthouse and the wind gauge spinning like a propeller, clear to me at last that the dark I have always struggled to keep under is in reality my most... unshatterable association until my dissolution of storm and night with the light of the understanding of the fire. My face in her breasts and my hand on her. We lay there without moving, but under us all moved, and moved us gently up and down and from side to side. Past midnight, never knew such silence. The earth might be uninhabited.
Krapp is Beckett's most autobiographical play. In it, he depicts a man very like himself, based on himself, puts in his own actual experiences. Krapp is on his 69th birthday, and he does not expect to live beyond the biblical 70, looking back over his life by listening to old tapes he made when he was younger. He discovers the moment when he made the great decision that he was going to be a writer, this was going to be his priority in life, and that he would accept his black vision of the world and of human destiny as the way he should be writing, and not trying to simply put a positive, optimistic view of life that might be easier for readers.
I'm working with impotence and ignorance. My little exploration is that little zone of being that has always been set aside by artists as something unusable, as something by definition incomparable with art.
He believed at the time that he didn't have very long to live. He really thought he was going to die because he had a tumor in his cheek that he thought was probably cancerous, and he put off going to a doctor as long as he possibly could. But in the meantime, he felt he had to write something important and leave it behind.
There followed for Beckett one of the most productive periods of his career. In 1946, he began to write in French, and by 1950, he had produced 4 of his major novels: Mercier et Camier, Malloy, Malone Muir, and L'Innommable.
I must say words, as long as all are at it, until they find me, until they say me. Strange pain, strange sin. I must go on. Perhaps it's done already. Perhaps they have set me already. Perhaps they have carried me to the threshold of my story, before the door that opens on my story. That would surprise me. If it opens, it'll be I, or the silence. Where I am, I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence, you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
Well, he began to write in French, partly because he was much more easy in French at the end of the war. He'd been speaking it right through the war. But mainly because he always found that the English language, especially as used by an Irishman, was a great block to getting a simple, honed-down kind of writing.
There is something in my English writing that infuriates me, and I can't get rid of it, a kind of lack of breaks.
That period, 1945, 1950, where he's what you can call the siege in a room. For 5 years, Beckett writes the core of his work. But he has 2 novels published that nobody's read. They sold 200 or 300 copies. He's close to 40, and he may be a little bitter. Watt was rejected by 47 publishers.
I am now retyping for rejection by publishers Malone Murr, the last, I hope, of the series Murphy, Watt, Mercier and Camier, and Molloy.
The Beckett novels particularly are full of people who seem to have no reason whatever for doing what they're doing. And of course that subverts the whole tradition of well-made 19th century fiction in which absolutely everything is a matter of reason followed by deed.
I took advantage of being at the seaside to lay in a store of sucking stones. So they were pebbles, but I call them stones. Yes, on this occasion I laid in a considerable store. I distributed them equally between my 4 pockets and sucked them, turn and turn about. Now this raised a problem, which I first solved in the following way. I had, say, 16 stones, 4 in each of my 4 pockets, those being the 2 pockets of my trousers and the 2 pockets of my greatcoat. Taking a stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat and putting it in my mouth, I replaced it in the right pocket of my greatcoat by a stone from the right pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my greatcoat, which I replaced by the stone that was in my mouth as soon as I had finished sucking. Thus, there were still 4 stones in each of my 4 pockets, but not quite the same stone.
But he's done something there that hasn't been done beforehand, mainly in his choice of hero. Instead of taking a good-looking young man falling in love with a girl and all that, he takes specimens of humanity who are bums, you know, who really are unhappy people who don't really belong to the real world and who are looked down on by everybody else.
Personally, I think the fiction is far ahead, superior in terms of quality and what it does in the plays. There are some good plays. Beckett was fond of his theater, but I think deep inside, it was the fiction.
Beneath what the waste rose and fell, all was silent. Above what the sky fell and rose, what was rooted to the spot. And sometimes Watt understood all, and sometimes he understood much, and sometimes he understood little, and sometimes he understood nothing, as now.
Hello, I'm Barney Rosset, publisher of Grove Press and Evergreen Books. I'm proud to be the American publisher of Samuel Beckett, whose play Waiting for Godot you're about to see. Waiting for Godot first opened in a tiny theater in Paris in the winter of 1952. Since then, it has become a classic of the modern theater.
You think God sees me? Now you must close your eyes. God have pity on me. And me? On me, pity, pity on me. Go. Who is it? Is it Godot? At last! Reinforcements at last! Oh. Is it Godot? We were beginning to weaken, and now we're sure to see the evening out. Oh. You hear him? We are no longer alone, waiting for the night, waiting for the Godot, waiting for... All evening we struggled and assisted, and now it's over. It's already tomorrow. Poor Pasto. I knew it was him. Who? Godot. It's not Godot.
It's not Godot?
Not Godot.
And who is it?
Passo. Oh. Let's go.
We can.
Why not?
We're waiting for Godot.
Oh.
I began to write Godot as a relaxation, to get away from the awful prose I was writing at the time, and the wildness and ruthlessness of the novels. A marvelous, liberating diversion.
It did not take Beckett long to write Waiting for Godot. Once complete, his wife Suzanne undertook the difficult task of getting the play produced. In 1950, Roger Blin, a young avant-garde theater director, took on the project. Finally, in January 1953, it opened at the tiny Theatre Babylon.
Reading about the opening of Waiting for Godot in Paris. And that got me very curious, and I went to a literary agent in New York, and I got the manuscript. I read it, I liked it, and made up my mind that I really wanted to get it, and I bought the rights for Grove Press to publish it.
June 25th, 1953. Dear Mr. Rossett, with regard to my work in general, I hope you realize what you are letting yourself in for. I do not mean the heart of the matter, which is unlikely to disturb anybody, but certain obscenities of form, which may not have struck you in French as they will in English, and which, frankly, it is better you should know before we get going, I am not at all disposed to mitigate.
And I went to Paris and had a date, made a date with Beckett at the Pont Royal Hotel, the bar, and we were to meet him at, I don't know, let's say 6 o'clock, and he came into this fairly famous bar, which was next door to Gallimard, in the basement, and he was in a raincoat, I remember, and he seemed in a hurry. And he said, well, I only have a few minutes, or whatever. That was about 6:30. I think about 4 o'clock the next morning, he was buying his champagne.
In January 1956, the first American production of Waiting for Godot opened at the Coconut Grove Playhouse in Florida. It was billed as The Laugh of Two Continents and starred Bert Lahr and Tom Ewell. Expecting a lighthearted comedy, the opening night audience was not prepared for the depth of Beckett's work. Mink-clad audience disappointed in Waiting for Godot. Jack Anderson, Miami Herald. Indecent, immoral, a great bore, the most baffling play of all time, Walter Winchell. There isn't the slightest quality about this play to recommend it to my readers. Paul Brunn, Miami Beach Sun.
I mean, I remember my reaction, and somehow both Beckett and I had great sympathy for the director, for Alan Schneider, who was fired right thereafter. And somehow both of us, for whatever our separate reasons, felt a great loyalty to Alan Schneider.
Dear Alan, success and failure on the public level never mattered much to me. In fact, I feel much more at home with the latter, having breathed deep of its vivifying air all my writing life up to the last couple of years. This Miami fiasco does not distress me in the smallest degree, or only insofar as it distresses you.
Due to the poor reception of Waiting for Godot in Miami, Snyder was not asked to direct the first Broadway production. However, he went on to become the major interpreter of Beckett's work in the United States, directing many critically acclaimed productions.
What's the play about, which is what I'm after. Now, the concept is to see if I can get a sense of waiting, of eternal
stalemate,
constant, unredeemed, unfulfilled, waiting on as many human levels as possible.
What do you